Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. When it comes to cutting dovetails, there's two primary methods, tails first versus pins first. I'm going to suggest you look at something we call the offset method. Stay with me. I'm going to share with you what I know. If you're new to woodworking, or if you're new to hand tool woodworking, it seems that everybody wants to be able to learn to cut dovetails. And then once you start doing it, you want to improve it and get better and get faster and the whole bit. And it is a lot of fun to do. It's a great way to hold two pieces of wood together at a right angle, or four pieces, and have it end up living long enough to become an antique. That's the reason why we have antiques. It was built right to begin with. So when it comes to cutting dovetails, there's two different methods that have been argued for centuries. Cutting the tails first or cutting the pins first. I'm going to suggest there's a third, but let me cover these ones first. So when you cut the pins first, and if you're not sure about this, this is a drawer. So the tails are the part that you would see on the drawer side, the white part. The pins are the ends of these pieces that would be on the drawer front. So there are those who feel that you should cut the pins first, turn it upside down and trace the other piece and cut it. And there are those who cut tails first. So you would cut your tails, remove all the waste, and then you would put that over top of the second piece and you would trace tails onto pins. Well, both work. I have an opinion that one is a whole lot easier than the other. And the method that I use now came up with 10 years ago. It's called the offset method. So you do it very similar to tails first, except you don't remove the waste. And you use those cuts that you made to actually start the second piece. I'm going to show you it's really, really accurate. And even people doing it for the first time can get great results. All right, now before I do this, let me just give you a little brief on where it came from and exactly what the difference is. So if you were trained in Europe, you would end up cutting pins first. And what they would do is they would cut out the pins, set it on top of the tailboard like so. And depending on how big it was, you might have to actually clamp it in place. And then they would take a fine pencil and they would reach in there and trace each one of these pins on the tailboard. Now you would have had to have your marking gauge line in there. I neglected to cut that. And being a tailboard, you have to go all the way around. And then you would transfer these lines and you would go, where's my dovetail marker? You would go across the end of the board. And then in the vise, you would saw square across the end and then follow that angle down the face. Now, if you were in England, you would have done tails first. So they would have taken the tailboard after they removed all the waste. Since you're doing a pin board, you're only going to scribe the two faces. Of course, this would all be done in the vise. Lay these two pieces on top, lay the tailboard on top of the pin board, flush it up. And then with a knife, you would go in tight against the side of the tail and you would drag that knife in through the end grain of the pin board, leaving a fine mark. You didn't want to make it too deep. You would be hard on your accuracy. Then you would finish by taking your square, or in this case my dovetail marker, and you would carry that line down the face. And then you would set that in the vise, and now you would have to cut right beside those lines. And it was difficult because if you got too close, the joint would be loose. Too far away, you either have a lot of paring to do or it'd be too tight, it would split. That was the tails first. Now it has its advantages, I think, and I'm going to show them to you. But the offset method is different than both. Again, it's a pin board, or since it's a tailboard that we're doing. Sorry, this is a pin board. We don't do the edges. We would set that in place. And we're going to use these cuts we've already made to guide the marking of the second piece, but a little bit different. We use a thing called an offset or a shim, and we push the top board over by the thickness of one saw kerf. One saw kerf right there. And then we take this special dovetail marking knife that has a blade in it that matches the dovetail saw blade. And we put it down in the kerf that we just made with the saw, and we drag it through the end grain of the pin board. Now, nice thing about that is it's going to leave you a kerf that is the exact same as your dovetail saw. So you then only have to put your saw in the kerf. You draw a line down the face so that you're getting a good plumb cut. I always draw the line so that it's attached to the piece I'm keeping. Set my saw on the kerf and finish that cut. That was terrible, whatever it was. The pin board in the vise. Bring it up so that it touches, or it's flush with the top of the plane. Set this back. Now put the tails on top. Make sure things are flush on the side. Holding that firmly, and you see how that tape ball holds it, the two pieces lined up, so it's perfectly flush out here. So there's your dovetail marking knife. And you're going to go in and lay it tight against the side of the tail, and then drag it through the end grain of the pin board. Now, I always want to try to get it right the first time, because if you have to go in and make a second line, and it gets a little fuzzy. So there's the marks I have to work to. I'll take my pencil and I'm going to draw some lines from that marking gauge line down here up to those marks we just made. I always tell my students to make sure your lines, your layout lines are accurate, because your saw is designed to follow those marks, so the marks have to be in the right spot. Put an X on the parts that are going to be removed. Now here's the challenge for folks, especially you get a little older. You've got to come in looking at the very fine line and get your saw to start cutting exactly where you want it. Sometimes it's hard to see, so what I'll do is put some light on that. The challenge is I've got to pay attention to the saw cutting across here. At the same time, I'm paying attention to the saw cutting down this line. So using my thumb and forefinger, I'll get right up against that mark. So you want that cut to be plumb, and you want it to be just on the waist side of that line. Now I've got to do that 5 more times. Yeah. Okay, so here's pins first. So pins are already cut. Scribe all the way around my tailboard. This is the first time I've ever done this, by the way. Pins first. Now, I think this is a great method, regardless of what way you choose to do it, having that tape wall. So I'm going to do the same thing for this one. It's always done on the tailboard. So the idea is we take our pin board, set it on top of the tailboard. I want them to be flush. You see how that tape wall helps to hold it in place. Now I'm going to use a regular pencil and go in and mark sides of the pins. Now that's the inside, that's right too. It's the other thing that I find a little bit different. You want this to be precise because this is the second half. You did the template. Now this has to match it. So, unlike the way I normally do it, I have to cut from the inside of the joint. Get that standing plumb. Let's just mark my waist. I'm really having to think about this because there are more differences than there are similarities. Okay. Cut across the end has to be perpendicular, meaning it's got to follow that line, and the slope cut has to follow that line in order to fit the existing template. Those inside corners need to be clean, no debris. Okay, so there's pins first. Set that in there so that it's flush with the top of the plane. Now, a little different equipment on this. I'm going to use a dovetail mark knife, but it has a sawtooth blade in it. And that blade is the exact same as the blade on the dovetail saw. So we'll set this up. Now I'm going to introduce what's called the Sean shim. This was made famous. This was developed by a man named Sean McDermott, combat wounded veteran. And we took his idea and turned it into this, named it after him. So it has 4 settings. Each one of these represents thousandths of an inch. Starts at 23 thou, 24, 25, 26. Same on the other side. So what you're measuring right there on the 24 thou that is the offset. That's how much difference between this and this. I'm going to take my dovetail marking knife. I'm going to push this over 24 thousandths of an inch. So by doing that, that little edge right there represents the width of the saw kerf. Hold it firmly, And if I move this tailboard to my left, I'm going to go to the right side. Sometimes helps to put a T on there representing tail. That's the piece I'm working on. So tailboard moves to the left. I mark the right side of the tail, and I just drop that down. Notice the saw curve does not allow it to move left or right. And then 3 or 4 or 5 markings through. Same thing on the right side of this tail and on this tail. And we're going to go the other way. So I'm going to flip it over, move the tailboard to my right, push it back into place. Now it's overhanging one saw curve. Hold that firmly. Since I move my tailboard to my right, I'm going to go to the left side of each tail. And I'll drop that down. You'll notice that my cut was off the line, but in this method, it doesn't matter, as you'll see. I got 1 out of 3 close. Okay, when that's done, remove that. I'll take that tape off. Now, I'm just going to get rid of that fuzz. Take my dovetail marker on its side. Okay, so let's identify the waste. This is being removed, this. Do the same thing out here in the front. So I'm going to draw my line so it stays attached to the piece I'm keeping. So this actually has some width. I'm going to draw my line to connect it to the far side or the keeper side, and this one I'm going to go the opposite. This allows me to saw right down beside the line instead of sawing through it. Move this out of the way. And the big advantage here is I can simply set my saw in the kerf. I no longer have to worry about this. All I have to focus on is making the plumb cut and paying attention to the line down here. Set that in the kerf. Now we'll finish off this tailboard, and I always save this to last because if you ever screwed up on your pin board, as long as you haven't processed the tailboard, you can make another pin board using the same tailboard. So this argument's been going on for a long time. So let me give you my take on it. We'll talk about the pins first, tails first. I'll save this one for last, the offset method. So what it boils down to is there's 2 cuts. There's a cut that has to be made on each one, and you have to determine which is going to be easier. I'm going to actually show it to you. On this one, you have to make, while maintaining a square cut across the end, you have to be able to come in, do that, and follow that angle perfectly, both that way and going that way. the tails first, and the question is, it involves a plumb cut. I'll just do it by eye. Is it easier to follow an angle up here where you're walking alongside a knife and make that cut plumb? Either way. So which one do you think is going to be easier to do? I suggest if you do a little practice, you'll find out it's a lot easier to do this one. Now, another argument for you. The nice thing about gravity and a heavy saw is that if I were to drop that, it goes perpendicular to the earth. So I always make sure that my board is standing in there plumb, which it isn't. If you have a saw that registers in your hand the same way every time you pick it up, that becomes, it develops some muscle memory. And you should be able to come in, start your cut, and make a plumb cut just by feel. Now, let me check it and see how I did. That's pretty good with no line. I think that comes naturally. Doesn't take that much practice. So pins first, tails first. You decide. My argument is tails first. The rest of it is splitting hairs. But let's set these aside and let me tell you why I think this is the method to use. You're going to have to cut your tailboard regardless. All three methods require that the cuts across the end of the board must be perpendicular. The joint won't work if it's not. In other words, this opening has to be the same as that opening, and that only happens if these two cuts are perpendicular and obviously parallel to each other. Now you have to throw in on the pins, you've got to make that perfect angled cut to follow a line as well. Either way, across the end has to be perfect. On this method, the angle does not matter. Before you remove the waste, you're going to come in and you're going to drag that little sawtooth blade through there and literally start your kerf on the end of the board. This is the part that was my almost head exploded when I realized how simple this could be. Here, on the tails first, the traditional tails first, you're trying to follow a knife line. And the older you get, the harder it is to see, the more difficult that procedure is. Not only are you trying to follow a line, but at the same time, you're having to watch your saw up here in the top. You're also having to watch your saw coming down the face to make sure that these cuts are plumb or the joint will not work. This one allows you to set your saw in that existing kerf. You forget entirely about worrying about along the top, and all of your focus is following that line down the face to make sure that that cut is plumb. So much easier. Now, I'll put them together and then we can evaluate. I would assume with the amount of practice I've had, they should all be somewhat decent joints. Okay, evaluation time. Although it really doesn't matter because it's not about me cutting them. It's about you, which method is going to get you to your level of success you want quicker. So if you look at these, I don't see anything wrong with that tail side. A little bit of a gap down here. And that looks pretty good. I don't know what's going on right there in that corner. Let's flip them around, look at the pin side. A little bit of a, didn't close down there. I don't know what I did. And a little bit of a gap. If you look really close, you see a little bit of a gap right there. This one, oh yeah, just starting a little bit of a split right there. This one, a little bit of a closure issue on the bottom of all three of them. That just may have been me not clamping it, planing it too quick. There's a little bit of a gap right there. And we look at this one, same issue, a little bit of a gap right there, just didn't close it. That may have been fixed just by leaving it set before I planed it. I don't know what's going on, maybe something right there. Overall, they all look pretty good, and I wouldn't change any of them. If I was building a set of drawers, I'd be satisfied with all three. So that one was the pins first. This is the one where we only picked up a couple of, well, that had the little split right there on the pin. You start to see it. This is tails first, and the only thing on the tails first, oh, we had a bit of a gap over here. And this was offset. So the offset is almost always going to give you the best look on this side because you're just starting, you're cutting in an existing kerf. And then on this side, and I wouldn't blame that on the method, it's just I didn't close it properly We've always planed it up. So, like I said, all three methods produce satisfactory results. Which one do you think you're going to be able to master quicker? My argument is do the offset method. It eliminates the biggest problem of the transfer from tails to pins, which is so difficult, or pins to tails. The transfer is the one that gets you. You can make a perfect first piece, whether it be tailboard or pinboard, but you got to get the second one perfect or else it doesn't work. I hope this opens up some discussion, probably some arguments. I'll get called some names. It's happened before. Anyway, enjoy it. Good luck with your dovetails. If you like my work and enjoy my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos and help take your woodworking to the next level. I've always said, better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the link below, the chisel and plane icon, it'll take you to our site and introduce you to all the tools that we actually manufacture right here in our shop. It'll also give you information on our online and in-person workshops.